All right, well, welcome everyone. We're going to do a quick credit hour refresh, and I have a PowerPoint to go through with a couple of points, but then we are going to actually walk through the matrix template, the credit hour matrix template, and go from there. So let's get started. If you could mute your phones or your computers, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, KB, there's echo.
Yep, I hear it. So just make sure you're muted and we will keep going. All right, so our agenda today, we're going to just do a quick overview. We're going to talk about why we do credit hour reviews. I'm going to quickly go through the required documents. There's only a few, and review the final step, because for those of us that have been around for a while, this final step has actually changed. And then I'm going to go through the actual cover sheet and the matrix. And then I'm also going to give examples of part 1 and part 2. And I'm going to go walk through it with you so you can ask questions. And then I'll just go over some final things at the end and stick around for Q&A. So that's the plan. Okay, so real quick, why we do credit hours. It is actually a requirement, federal regulations that accredited institutions must comply with it. And then as course developers and subject matter experts, we need to ensure that the quantity of student learning is, equivalent and equitable. So that's kind of the definition there of what we are looking for 45 hours of coursework, and that's throughout the duration of the course. So those are just a quick overview of why we do it. It is required, and as chairs, we're required to go back through our courses right now because there's some things that have gotten lost, and we just need to make sure that everything is, correct and accurate before our visit upcoming. So, all right, and I have the chat kind of going back and forth, so I'll try to look back and answer questions best of my ability. So, all right, so the documents, there's 2. There is the credit hour cover sheet, and I'm going to show it in just a second. And there's also the matrix template. The matrix template is what we're going to spend most of the time in today. And the cover sheet is really just a quick overview of what you found during the credit check. And then the final step, and I put it here because I want you to have the address of which you need to send it to. So it used to be that we would send it, in with the courses, and then we also had to upload it to, at one point in time, we had to upload it into a folder that was shared. We don't do that anymore because, and I'm guilty of it, sometimes it's easy to forget, and then the information doesn't get, to where it needs to go. So the new process, if you're not aware, is once you're done with a credit hour check, you actually email it. And both the cover sheet and the matrix need to go to credithour@ashford.edu. And that is a fairly new process, and it's important because then they will store it, and we don't have to worry about it. They have it, and they have all the information they need should there be a question. So, all right, I'm just going to check the chat real quick, make sure there's no questions. Okay. Moving on. I don't know why, but my buttons keep disappearing here. There we go. Okay, so the credit hour cover sheet. This is a sheet that just highlights the information. So, and I'll show this in just a second. And you need to make sure for this one that all of the information is filled in, and then, before you submit it. And again, I'm going to pull it up in just a second. And then the matrix is actually the main form, and it's created in Excel, which is a good thing for us because then it adds everything up for us, which is really nice. And the format and the categories that are in there, they cannot be changed. This is a document that was created a while back, and I'm not exactly sure by whom, but everything in there has a formula, and it's how it should be. It's the equivalencies, and we can't really change any of that. So I'll show you some ways that we can step in if we think something, maybe doesn't quite add up or whatever. We'll go over that in just a minute, but we can't change the document. We have to keep it the way it is. And the important thing for now is you cannot submit a credit hour review unless it's 3 credits. And you'll see at the bottom of the document, there's this green strip and this is the matrix I'm talking about, and it tells you what it is per credit. So 132 to 138 hours is 3 credits, and that's where we need to stay. So make sure that you're within that range when you submit it. I'm going to show this.
Hey, Christina, this is Holly.
Yep.
Hey, so we are looking at credit hours right now, and part of the issue is that WASC may be flagging anything that's less than 135. So we really want to aim for the 135 hours. And that's the latest that I have on that. And I'll keep you posted if that changes.
Okay, so try to stay at 135. And Holly, can it be between 135 and 138?
I think that would be fine. I think that it's right now, I know they're only flagging when it's less than 135.
Okay.
If I were you, I would make it 135 hours. Only because I know Dr. Noon wasn't wild about the range in general. And who knows if next year they're going to say, oh, no, we need them to be 135. And then we'll be in the same place we are right now. So if at all possible, have it hit the 135.
And that's good to know, because that's a tall order to make it exactly something. So I think today when we go over the matrix, hopefully I can give you some tips of, how to make that work, how to make that happen. So.
Katie, also, it does get flagged, everyone, if it's 134.8, say. It literally has to be 135.
Okay.
So I just want to point that out.
Thank you, Holly. That's really good information for sure. Yes, thank you. Okay, so I am going to move on. I want to show you each of these documents. Whoops. I'm sorry. I'm going to share with you the cover sheet first. So this is what the cover sheet looks like. As you can see, hopefully you can all see my screen. It's really simple. So you're going to put the course number, and I'm using a matrix today as an example of ECD 245. So I would put that course number there, and then I would put the course name, and then or the College of Education. So I already have that in there. And then this is important. It's important that you say who prepared it. So you, because if they have questions, they need to know who to go back and ask. And the same is true for the date. The date's important because we know that we update our courses and we change them. So when we enter the date, they know which version to look for. And I always like when I save the matrix to try to somehow enter the date there too, so it's an easy, when they can just look at the examples that they have and open the most recent one. And then the total credits and total hours will go here. So total hours, the goal is 135. So we want to make sure that we put that there. And the comments, right now it says NA, and you can see that this is a box that you can write in. It says NA, but the comments are really used if you have something unique in the course, and it does happen, especially now, we're updating how we're doing our courses and we're adding in some really fun things. And so if there's something that, you felt as you were going through the credit hour check with a matrix that you had to use your professional judgment, this is a good place to put it so that, again, this is a high-level overview so that when they look at it, they know, what you were thinking as you were going through it. And you'll be able to document it in the matrix as well, but it's nice to put it here if there was something that, you had to really alter or think through. So, and again, we can't alter the matrix, but I'll show you what I mean when we get to the matrix. And then if you scroll down, this is kind of an FYI for you. This is information for you to have. As we go through the matrix, you're going to see that each of these components are in there, and that's what you're actually counting in the course. And so here are the definitions. So in the matrix, there's no room for the definitions, so you'll have to come back to this page. So this is the actual course component. This is how much it's worth. And then this is kind of, it gives you examples of what they mean. And we're not going to go through every one of these because we're going to go through the matrix and, some of them are going to come up. But if you're looking at the matrix and you're not really sure what they mean by summative written assignment, you can come back to this page, and these are it's just kind of a nice outline of you know, what each means. And I'm not going to scroll too far down, but any questions about the cover page before I move on?
Hey, KB, this is Holly. Is this the new one? The cover sheet I have, it looks a little bit different. So is this the one we should be using?
This is the latest one that I had.
Okay.
So if there's a
Okay.
new one, I mean new as in, yes, Michelle, I will send everything to you. I actually did put it in the meeting invite too, but I will send everything out later too. Holly, I'll have to check on that. This is the only one I've ever seen. So
Okay.
that's
Great.
good to know that there's another one floating around,
Yes.
because I have yet to see it. So we'll
Okay,
get that figured out, and if there's a new one, then I will update the meeting invite, and I will send the updated one out for sure.
Thanks, KB.
Yep. All right. I am going to go back to where I was here. Sorry, toggling back and forth here. All right. So next is the actual matrix. Before we actually go into the matrix itself and walk through it, I just wanted to give you an example. This is one I did, you know, a while ago for the EDDI program. And I wanted to show you the example because I've seen different matrices come my way to look at, and this part right here, the description of course component, really does need to be completed. It's not something that you should leave blank, because there are times when we have to go back into the course and make changes, and then we have to come back and update our credit hours. And so when this part isn't filled in, it's really hard to know what was counted. And so we have to assume that somebody else is going to be looking at the matrix, not just us. So they need to understand what we were counting, because we do have to use our professional judgment for some of this. So I bring this example up just so you can kind of see when completed, and then we'll go through the actual matrix in just a second. So make sure that you fill in this description of course component. And this is the estimated student academic engagement time. These are the things that we just saw, the equivalencies. We cannot alter these for the most part. These are what, you know, was pre-prescribed and what we need to try to stick to. This is the part, the actual course component, this is the part that you're going to complete. So for the formative written assignments, in this particular course, there was only one, and it was the week 3 assignment. And we typically use ranges like 3 to 4 pages. If you have a range with a written assignment, you need to pick the high range. Again, we're erring on the side of the student and how much potential time it could take them. So if we give that range, it could be that they submit 4 pages, so you need to go with the highest one. All you do for the matrix is you put in the number 4 here. This will automatically calculate for you, and we'll do that in just a few minutes. And then write where the course component was. And in the second half of this, it will become more important, and I'll show you that in just a second. And so you can kind of see that I filled this in. I do want to point out that this one right here, the multimedia presentations, this one does not calculate for you. I'm not sure why, and I'm not an Excel wizard, so you know, I don't know if it was because there was variances in this or what, but it does not calculate. So if you put 8 slides in here like this one is, you've got to do the math, 8 times 45 minutes, and then you've got to physically put in the number here. There's another one that it happens to as well, but it's not one that we use all that often. So I just want to draw your attention to that, because that's caught me a couple times. You know, I've forgotten that it won't add up, and I'll go down to the final credit hour check, and I'm like, this is really weird. It's kind of low, you know, and you go back and you look, and okay, that's because it didn't calculate itself. So Frank says, I think we calculated our pages at the lower range. Okay, so yeah, you're going to want to use the higher range just because we do need to err on the side of students. So that's an easy fix. All right, so on to the second one here. This one is where, I'm sorry, these buttons just do not like to show up. Okay, this is where it gets really important to include this right here, the description of course component. We're talking about our textbooks. Sometimes there's multiple textbooks. Sometimes we only use, 3 or 4 chapters in a textbook. It just depends on the situation. And so this is one where, if something changes and you decide to update a textbook, or maybe, you just decided to take one out and use, a different resource or something, if you include the actual course component here, it's really helpful. So I know when I look at here that these are the chapters that were assigned in this course and the pages that coincide with them. And I know that our Constellation text, it gets complicated sometimes because there are no page numbers. But there is a way that you can get the PDF version of the textbook, and sometimes you can do it right in Constellation. If you can't, you can always reach out to the Constellation team and they can get it for you. Especially as a developer, it's a nice thing to have, and that will help you, be able to calculate the page numbers. Let's see. Maureen says you include all reference pages from the text or just the readings. What do you mean reference pages from the text, Maureen?
So sometimes when I have a textbook, there might be 5 to 8 pages following each chapter of references. Mm-hmm. So do I need to include that as well?
No, you actually don't. And, I think people do it differently. And again, I think it depends on the situation. It depends on what you're having students do. Like, for example, there was one course that the glossary was actually very useful for what the discussion was. So, you can include the glossary if you feel like students might go there, but typically this is what's assigned. So whatever students are required to read, this is what you put here. So if you don't require them to read the references, then you don't have to put it.
Thank you, KB.
You're welcome.
That being said, I think if you are at one, real close to that range, this is a good place to get a very small amount of wiggle room.
Yes.
Like let's say you're 134.8, adding the reference pages might put you at 135. So and that's not being, you're not being unethical by adding in those pages. So that can give you a little bit of room. Or if you're over and you included them, you could take them out.
Yeah, and there are some students that do look at those pages, especially if you're asking them to include a resource. They might look at those pages for ideas. So absolutely, and that's where when we go through the matrix, you'll see that there are some things we can do to really help us get to that 135. And, we do have a little bit of wiggle room in here. So, and then Michelle says, is this Excel issue of not calculating an easy fix? Maybe, Michelle, I'm not sure. Again, I was always told with the matrix that I was not permitted to change it. I'm not in charge of the document. I didn't create it. So I have kind of just gone with how it was sent to me. So it's a good question. And I do feel like it should be an easy fix, but I just was always told not to change it. So if we're allowed to change it, I say that's the matrix we use. So good question. All right. Let's see if there's anything else here. I'm not sure why, but when this copied, the minutes didn't come through. But the video runtime is very easy. And you can see here, I put the actual video. So in week 1, there's a 3-minute video. Week 2, there's a 3-minute video and a 5-minute video. So the actual course components by week, so you know how many videos, what the runtime is, and then you add them all up, in the video runtime. And it's by minutes. So if the video was 1 minute long, that's how much it counts for students. So that one's a really cut and dry and easy one. Research. So when we do assignments, we might assign students, we might say you need to support your assignment with 3 resources. This is what gets counted here. That's what it's talking about. And sometimes there's confusion between the journal articles and the research, because they're reading the journal article, so it's research, but this is actually page read. So this is the amount of pages that they read in those articles Research is how many resources you're requiring students to use throughout the course. So this includes discussions and assignments both. And that's why it's important, again, to come back to here, because it could be that it's not just the assignments, that there's discussions, that it's included as well. So it's important to write that down. I see some things happening in the chat, so. All right. Okay.
Maybe isn't that double dipping with the research when you're doing, you know, they're doing this, the reading the journals, aren't they also researching? I'm not understanding that.
Yes, but, and I will, let me go back to this. So hang on a second. I'll show you why it's not double dipping, because I asked the same question. It's actually a really good question. If you come down to the definitions, sorry if I'm making your eyes go crazy here. So if you look at scholarly journal articles, this one, it's assigned reading. And I'm sorry, let me go back up here. If you go to the assignments, you'll see it includes research. So it includes the time that students spend researching when we count the actual assignment. And when we go through the matrix, we'll do that. So it's not double dipping because you're actually giving them the time here for the research. But when you're asking them to, this is the research that you're assigning. And that's why when you come back, I'm sorry, I have to keep going back and forth here with Zoom. When you come back to this part, are you talking about the reading?
It sounds like maybe you're talking about the must include 2 scholarly journals, articles in your, and so you're counting that. Is that what you're counting, as opposed to read these articles and do this?
Yes. So the research is separate. When you assign students, and this is something when we go to the matrix, that's something actually important to consider. When you ask students to, say it's an assignment and you ask them to include 3 resources, outside resources, it's assumed it's not the textbook. And students don't necessarily always choose what we require. So they might find 3 completely separate resources than what we included in the course.
Okay, so that sounds like an easy thing to do, is go through and look at how many required scholarly. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and that's really the point at the course guide that you're looking for. You're looking for those scholarly resources that you're, as a developer, that you're requiring. So it is different from what they're actually reading. So I just wanted to.
Michelle, I think when you think about it, the journal articles are ones specifically that you are assigning in the required reading, and then the research is what they're doing on their own. We don't have a page number because, how long do we know? We don't know what they're actually researching. So.
Right, and the double dipping would be if they just include the articles that they've been required to read, right? But we're assuming that isn't happening.
Yeah, and there's a lot of this that, again, we have to use our professional judgment, and some of it is there's just really, truly no way for us to know. Like when we start digging into websites versus web pages, some of that will come up again. There's no way for it to be an exact thing, but we really try to, we try to measure it and make it equitable, from student to student, class to class. That's really the idea. So, all right. Any other questions with this? Again, this is just an example, and mainly because I wanted to point out this course description component. This isn't something that when we go through the examples, we're really going to touch too much on. So. All right, Jen, I'm just reading here. Okay, good. All right, whoops. I don't want to do that, I'm sorry. Again, these buttons disappear. Here we go. All right, so we're gonna go through the matrix right now. And if you go to your meeting invite, I did include one. And if you wanna open it up and follow along with me, that's perfect. If you just wanna watch, that's fine too. Whatever is easiest for you. So this is the actual matrix. This is what it looks like. It is blank when you get it, except for the pre-prescribed things that you have here. So if you click in the cell, you're not going to see much. These things are already here. Don't change it. You really don't want to do that. So the first one is the formative written assignments. These are pretty cut and dry. How many assignments do you have throughout the course? Typically, I know in my program, it's, we have one in week 3, one in week 4, and that's it for formative. Because, you're not counting journals because they're counted right here, and you're not counting summative because they're counted here. So this is just the formative written assignments. In the example I showed you for ECD 245, there was only one formative assignment, and the reason for that is because the other assignment was actually a PowerPoint. So that doesn't get counted as right here as a formative written assignment. That would get counted down here as a multimedia presentation. So it all depends on the formatting of the assignment. And there's some nuances with this. I speculate there's gonna be some questions that come up. So I'll just I'll keep going unless those questions come up, and then I'll come back to it. But so if the assignment said 3 to 4 pages, you would click in the cell, type 4, and then, because again, you go to the highest number, once you click off the cell, you'll see it automatically calculated it for me. And that's based on this right here, this calculation of 150 minutes per page. And then you would come into the description of the course component and you would say what week that was found in. And that one, I believe, was week 3 assignment. And you would just type it in.
And obviously, if you have 2 written assignments, you would add up the total pages and put it in there, and just make sure you put in both weeks where it's found.
Yeah. It really, some of this is very cut and dry. The course, one of the courses I just did, there were 2 formative assignments. And so, yes, you would just type in an 8 instead of a 4 because it was 3 to 4 pages. And then it's automatically going to update it. Then over here, you would just, week 2 assignment, week 3 assignment, you would type in where it is. So I'm going to get rid of that for a second. All right, the summative written assignments, again, they assume that because it's a summative, it's going to take more time. And there's going to be times where you might look at these calculations and go, wow, 300 minutes per page, that's a lot. Again, this is just what we were given. This is how they calculated it, so we just kind of go with it. We cannot adjust it, with the exception of a couple things, and I'm going to touch on those specifically when we get down here to the PowerPoints. So the summative written assignments is the same thing. You look at the summative, how many pages was it? A lot of times you'll see it's 8 to 10, so you put the 10 in because you always go to the highest number, and that's the time per minutes that was spent. And then you would put, obviously it's the summative, so you would just put, summative week 5. That one's pretty self-explanatory. All right, then the discussions. So this one, the question that I always get is, do I have to count the introduction? The answer is yes. We've moved our introduction forum to, having a tidbit of content in it usually. So you do have to count the introduction as a discussion, the introduction discussion. So it does count. It's not separate. You can't leave it out. So typically, it just depends on how many discussions you have. Let's say there's 8 discussions. Again, you put the 8 in, and it automatically calculates it for you. For this one, I would specifically put in here intro so that they know it was the intro discussion, week 1, and then go per week, how many discussions were in that week, again, as your description. If I'm going too fast, just let me know, and if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Okay, then this is the one.
I wonder how much the cleaning crew is going to charge. I wonder how much the cleaning crew.
Stacy, can you mute, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so for multimedia presentations, this one gets a little tricky because we can have multimedia presentations as a summative. Sometimes we have them, and I've seen them in discussions, and sometimes they can be in a formative assignment. So this one gets a little bit tricky because we have to try to accommodate the credit hours for it. So the multimedia presentations, it's 45 minutes per slide. And there's some multimedia presentations that we have students use the notes. Sometimes they're just using the slides. So it kind of depends on how it's mentioned in the actual course. So again, it's 45 minutes per slide. You would want to put the actual course component. So how many slides? Let's just say it was a 6-slide presentation. And this is the one that I was saying isn't calculating itself. I don't know, again, if there was a purpose behind that. I have no idea. So I didn't change anything with this, but I will find out if we can and if there's an updated matrix. And then you would put the description, you would put what it's for, again, just like the other ones. Now, the question has come up because a lot of times you're going to see this as the summative. And so if this is a summative and, up here, let's just say our typical summative is, let's just say it's 8 pages. It's 2,400 minutes. If it's a summative and you go with this calculation of 45 minutes per slide, and let's say you're requiring students to have 10 slides, then, when you do the math and you figure it out, this is actually, it's less than if the summative counted up here. 45 minutes per slide, 300 minutes per page, there's some variance there. So with this one, you do have a little bit of latitude to change it if it's a summative, okay? What I've found is, I guess it works, is 60 minutes per slide instead of 45. And I asked, before the person left who trained me on this, I asked her specifically about this because we had a situation where it was a summative. And she suggested 60 minutes per slide for a summative, but use your best professional judgment here. If you feel like it's going to take them long, if you're requiring, them to do slide notes and research in the slide notes and all that stuff, you might decide it's more than 60 minutes per slide. You can change this. And all you do is you just change it, put 60, and then this way, when you come over here to type the actual course component, you will remember I added up 60 minutes per slide in the actual time per minute. Okay, so that one, you do have some latitude to change, but you have to note it. You have to explain that you changed it so that they know you varied from what actually was supposed to be here, and you have to explain why. So for this, you would put the description of course component where it was. So here you would say, week 5 summative. Over here is where you would write that you actually changed the calculation. And then going back to the cover sheet, this is something that you really should notate on the cover sheet. They should know that you changed this, again, because we're supposed to keep this the same. They should know that you changed it, and you don't have to go into why. You can just refer to these notes section, and they can open it up and look here and see, why you chose to do what you did. So we do have some professional latitude with these if you feel like the equivalencies are not accurate based on what's in your course. And I'll see if I have a question here. Is the credit calculation value we were given different? Okay. And Jesse, I don't know the answer to that. When I was working in the MASL program, I was told that there was no difference. But it seems odd to me that the course requirements would be the same, but based on the definition, I also understand what they're saying. So I don't know the answer for grad, and I'm sorry. Allie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on who the best one to ask for that.
Yeah, I can. I already have a couple questions in for Iris. Wask is here today, so I won't hear back from her, but I will definitely check with Iris about that and get back to you. I mean, the grad hours, there's more hours per course for the required course. That's definite. And yes, obviously there's another week, but I will make sure that we're using the same. If there's a different spreadsheet, I'll get it out to all of you, not just the graduate people. And just to follow up on this section, I know in Eddie, we came across an issue where we had a presentation one week and a presentation in the final. Mm-hmm. So you can also, delineate 45 minutes per slide for week 3, 60 minutes per slide per week 5, and then in your notes just just explain the difference in the minutes.
Yep, and that was my next point. So if it's okay. I had one course developer say, oh, then I'll just take the presentation out of week 2. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is just explain over here in the course component, which one was 45, which one was 60. It's completely fine if you have both. You just do the math and, put the difference, but you would put one calculation in here for the actual course component. So, and I agree, as far as the grad ones, I would like to think there's a different one because there is a difference. You have an extra week and there's a different formula for it, really. So I'm curious to know the answer to that too. So thank you, Allie, I appreciate it. All right, and then the journals, again, this is just how many journals that you have in the course, just like up here. This is how many pages, this is how many discussions. Typically our courses will have 2 journals, it depends, and it will automatically calculate it for you, and you can just put the weeks that the journals were in there. Collaborative group projects, I love that this is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So this tells you as a developer, again, you can use your professional judgment for these collaborative group projects. And I know we don't use it a ton. There are some courses I've come across that do have them. So you can decide as far as the actual course component time and then how many total minutes. But it says here you cannot exceed 10 hours. That's a lot of minutes. So use your best judgment for that one. Case study analysis. So this is if, and a lot of our courses are going to this now, this is not a scenario. And I just want to differentiate. It's not a scenario. If students just have a scenario that they can read real quick and, go about their discussion, that does not count here. You would count that just as a discussion. But the case study analysis is if they have case studies, lengthy case studies that they have to read, then you would count 120 minutes per page for those case studies. I have only come across one, and I think I want to say it was a 10-page packet of case studies that I found. So in that respect, the actual course component here would be 10 pages is what you would put here. And then again, it's not calculating, so you would just calculate that. So, all right, interviews. I've seen this. There's an interview in ECE 101. This one gets a little bit tricky because the interview itself is actually part of an assignment, but that's the written portion of it. So you have to count the interview, the time they're actually interviewing the person. You have to count that separate from what they're actually writing. So if there's, 10 questions, it's 45 times 10 questions. All right. And then questionnaires. I honestly don't think I've ever seen a questionnaire, but maybe. Quizzes. It's just how many quizzes you have in the course, 30 minutes per quiz, and the comprehensive exam, same thing. For quizzes and exams, I know sometimes we do those where they're not required. You don't include those here. This is only the required components of the course that you include. So, any questions? Okay, so Kelly, did you find it then? Is that what this is from?
Yeah, it looks like the sheet is the same, but the cover sheet that went along with it had that specific note on it. So I don't know if that is helpful or complicates things, but you're right on the credit hour equivalency calculation sheet is the same.
Okay. So, but still, it's a good delineation there. Undergraduate courses may not exceed 150 contact hours. Graduate may not exceed 177. So that's good information. Kelly, would you mind sending me that cover page?
Yep, I'll just forward the whole email.
Perfect, thank you. Then I will include that and I'll specify that that's for graduate level, a different cover page. Wonderful.
Hi, Phoebe, this is Chris. Quick question. Yep. What if you have something that doesn't clearly fit into one of these categories? For example, building a website. That's something that we do in Malt. That's something that we do in BADE. I tend to just use the projects category, and it's not a group project because they're doing it individually, but I'll put in the notes, students build a website and stuff like that. And so that's the category I've been using for things that just don't easily those authentic, right, more authentic assessments, right, that we try to incorporate.
Yes.
Am I okay? Are we okay doing that? Or what's, I'm sure there's been lots of conversation about, things like that.
Yeah, there's been lots of conversation, but no explicit direction. So yes, I think, again, using your professional judgment, if you feel like it fits best there, yeah, absolutely. And the question came up, I'm going to go to the second half of this page.
So Chris, where did you say that you put it then? You add a new category, did you say?
No, I used the projects category for that.
Okay, gotcha.
And then I put a note that the students are doing it individually because they're not working together, and that they're just like building a website or creating an infographic. That's another thing that we've had,
Yeah.
so something like that. So that's kind of where I've been putting it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I think you actually brought up a great point. I was going to talk about it down here. So you have this space down here, multimedia resources. This is something that I've started utilizing a lot, and I think a lot of people have, because we are including more things in our courses. So one of the most recent questions that came up was students have to create a YouTube video. And even though it's part of what they're doing, so they have to create this in the assignment, but what they're actually submitting, part of it is a transcript. So that would be the written piece. But somehow we have to also count that they're required to create that video. This is another spot that you can use for that stuff. They may not know how to use YouTube. And so the purpose behind this particular category was, if there's a website, and I'm just going to use Prezi as another example, that they may not know how to use, but you're requiring them to use, this is a spot where you could put that too. And the YouTube video is a good example because it needed to be counted separate. It's not double dipping because it was a separate requirement that you really can't include in the written part of it. So this would be a good place to put it. And again, use your best judgment. If you feel like what you're asking them to do is not going to take them 60 minutes, you can adjust this. And so just come up here and adjust the time. And just like with the PowerPoint, if you have different things, all you have to do is come over here, talk about where it is and what you counted for the minutes and why. There was one, I remember, it was an interactivity that somebody had created, and 60 minutes to complete the interactivity was really outrageous, because I think it maybe took them 5 minutes. So for that one, I just differentiated it here and said, 5 minutes, week 2, and I used the title of exactly what the interactivity was. There was another thing within the course, though, where students were required to, and I want to say it was Vocaroo, they had to read a tutorial on Vocaroo, but then they actually had to create something. So the tutorial that they were required to read, that's a required resource that went up here. But the actual, in the journal article requirements, but the actual creation of the Vocaroo was separate. So it was counted down here. So I think the key is, whenever you look at the course guides, you need to try to include everything that a student is going to do that's going to take them time. So if they don't know how to use a resource, or if you're asking them to do something, Chris, this is also one that you can use. But I think it's completely fine if you use what's up above. Use your judgment, and if you think the time allotted is perfect, I don't see any problem with it. The key is just that it's counted somewhere. So that was a great question. And on the other one, I showed you the textbooks. Again, best judgment, what are you having students read? This is a good one for you to have latitude with. If you need a little bit of room, if you're a little bit low, you can go ahead and count those resource pages or glossaries or, parts of it that maybe you didn't. And, the other side of it is, if you're a little bit high and you did count the resources, the glossary, you can take those components out in the actual minutes.
KB, This is Maureen. I do a brain break and the students listen to audio. So where would audio fit?
So is it, I'm assuming it tells how long the audio is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that would go right here under videos. And even though it's not a video that they're watching, they still have to sit in front of their computer. It has to be on, and they have to do something with it. So you could absolutely put that here.
Okay.
You could put it down here if you wanted to. You would just have to change this to actual minutes, the running time. That's why I think it's easier if you do it up here, because it's already, it's easy. It's an easier way to calculate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. I love all of these examples. That's why I like this, because there are, whenever you look at any course, there's no two courses that are exactly the same. So even though this seems like a really cookie cutter way to do it, it needs to be, because we do have to make sure that, you know, that we're not asking too much of students, but we also don't want the rigor to be not enough. So this kind of gives us a good guide for courses. All right, research. I will tell you that this one is probably one that you're going to want to remember. So if you create a course, and let's say you're at 132, and you really, you know, you're like, how can I get to 135 for, you know, the proper amount of hours? This is a good place to start, because if you want to go back into the course and adjust something, because you're typically doing this before you submit the course, if you want to go back and adjust something, this is the easiest thing to adjust. So it might be in one discussion, maybe you don't have any required resources, but maybe you want them to. Maybe you can go back into the course and you can say, you know, for this discussion, I think I want them to support it with a scholarly resource. Go ahead, back in the course guide, make that adjustment, and then maybe here you had 8 required resources throughout the course. And then you decide, okay, I'm low on credit hours. I need to boost it up a little bit. And I just want to show you. So right now it's at 14 hours. I want to show you how much it increases it, because it's really the easiest fix if you need a fix. I'm going to add it. I'm going to add one more because I'm low. That's how much it boosted it up. So you can kind of see. It's like 1.5. It really does a great job of increasing the hours in an easy way that you can go back into the course and fix it. And the only thing I would caution you with this one, and this is more for those of you who are new, if you've already worked through your rubrics for assignments, you don't want to go back into the course and change the resources for assignments, because the rubrics are not as easy to change as, you know, just going back through a discussion and, you know, maybe upping the requirements for the resources, or, you know, even dialing it back, you know, from those discussions if your credits are high. This is a good one, and I know I've worked with several of you, and that's kind of my go-to. If we're low, if we're high, that might be the first place I look, because it's the easiest fix. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Okay, and then the guidance is, we always have 5 weeks, so these are kind of gimmies. Instructive feedback, this is just per assignment. It does not include journals. You know, we just assume that the feedback that we give to students on journals is not as heavy as what we give them on assignments. So it's 30 minutes per assignment. So however many, if you go back up here, however many assignments you had, and it includes the summative, you would go down here and you would just put the number of assignments. So if I have 2 formative assignments and a summative, I have 3 assignments. That's how many hours or minutes they should go through and read our feedback. And I know, I'm hoping they actually read it, so I don't know. All right, any questions with the matrix so far? Any other situations that have come up that you want to, you know, I mean, I think it's good for all of us to hear it. If there are things that have come up and you're not sure where to include it, I think, you know, sometimes those are the hardest part about this. Definitely so.
I have a question.
Yep.
Came up with this today. So we have a couple of areas, and Frank and Michelle, correct me if I'm off, where our ID created, like the students have to complete a task to get an image before they do the discussion. So our ID has it labeled as a quiz with quotation marks. And when I chatted with her this morning, she said that's the way it has to be written, even though it's not a quiz and they don't get graded on that. They're only graded on the discussion. So but we don't add that as a quiz, correct? Even
so they have to do it though?
Yeah. So
Is there a self-check on here anymore?
No. And that was what I kind of brought up, that you can't count the self-check because unless it's a requirement. If the self-check is required, then you would count it as a quiz. So that's a good one.
I would say multimedia.
Yeah, and Nicole, so they have to just go find an image?
They have to click on, Frank, and maybe you might be able to explain it, or Michelle better, but they click on the link and it just gives them an image. So they're randomly assigned an image that they have to speak about. So it takes probably 10 seconds for them to do
and I wouldn't even include it, because if they're just clicking on it and it's given to them, they don't have to go search for it, then they don't actually have to do anything. I would just, that sounds like it's just part of the discussion to me.
Yeah. KB, it's Jen. I've seen that in their course guide, and I agree. I would just count it as part of their discussion. I wouldn't, it's just their way of randomly assigning them to a group so I wouldn't count it as anything else either.
Okay.
I want to make sure it's not going to get flagged because of the word quiz that's in the course guide.
Yeah, and you know what? If you're concerned about it, in the matrix under the quiz section, you can note it. Okay. And then just put a 0. Leave it as a 0 and just note, even though week 2, discussion, whatever, it is not a quiz, and then just explain why. You really have ample space here to explain it. So if you're concerned and you really want whoever's reading this to know that you thought about it and you were thoughtful about it, that's the best place to do it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nicole also was asking about like if you're putting something in Portfolium. And I think that it just depends on if it's already built into a discussion or assignment. But you could also add a multimedia piece just once in the course in case students aren't familiar with how to use Portfolium. Nicole?
Yes. We counted the instructional part for that. So, and what they're uploading is a video for Portfolium. So I wasn't sure where we add that piece for Portfolium, or do we? Is it just the video that they have to do for it?
So since it's a requirement that they use Portfolium, that can go back to, you could probably do it under website if it's something that they have to actually figure out and use. You could put the actual requirement to use Portfolium here, and then yes, your video would be separate. And I don't know if it's your discussion, then that would be, you would have put it up here already as a discussion. But you're doing your resources, you're really doing those separate. You're really counting all the required resources each week. If it's an article, how many pages. And websites, this can get confusing. They're telling us now you have to, differentiate between a website and a web page. And typically the way we've been doing it is if it's a web page, they're just reading something quickly. It's not typically going to take them that long. That usually we just count up here as a journal article because it would just be a page of reading. Websites, a website could be if they have to, like Portfolium's a good example, if they have to use it, get to know it. A website could also be if you have them linking to something and there's information, but maybe they're going to link away from that. I would consider that a website. It's not necessarily that they're sitting there reading everything on the page, but they might be using it for something in the discussion or assignment.
KB, would that also be if there's a site that you're sending them to and they have to explore multiple tabs and utilize more than just an article, a web article?
Yes, and I asked this question and it was actually QA that answered it, and they said because you don't know where they're going to go off from that website, it's impossible for us to count that. Which makes sense because we don't know, we can count in the course component the best we can, but we can't control where they go. So I don't know if that answers your question, but and websites really, if you look at it, it's 30 minutes per URL. So they're given time to really explore that website. 30 minutes is a long time on a website. There's not too many people that spend that much time on one website. So it's accounting for them going and, finding whatever else there is on that. So That's what I would say. And Jen, thank you for bringing up the assignment. So, and Jen, I actually can't remember the answer to this, so I'm hoping that you'll help. So there's times when we're trying to scaffold throughout our course, and we're having students maybe create something in week 1 that's ultimately then allowed to be included in their summative. So we can't double dip, we can't count it twice. So Jen, do you mind speaking on that for just a second?
Yeah, so what we've done, and I know there's a lot of assignments, especially in ECE and EDDI, that we've done this where they've, like KB said, they've started an assignment maybe in week 2, or they're using part of a discussion that they've done, and they come back and they add on to it and revise based on feedback in their summative. And in our summative directions, it's very clear that they're revising. And so we didn't feel that when they had an assignment that was partly revised and partly new work, that the 300 minutes per page that they're given on a summative was necessarily accurate because they were revising work. So what we did was almost like a hybrid where we did an average. So if we had pages that were revised, let's say they had a 10-page assignment and 4 of the pages were revisions, we counted 4 pages at 150 minutes and then 6 pages at 300 minutes, and we would count the time that way. So I didn't know if there were instances in other people's programs where maybe they, at their summative, part of their summative was revised or built upon work they had previously done in the course. And so then it altered how we calculated the summative. Does that make sense?
It does. That is so important because it does come up. It comes up often. And I think just kind of as an overarching thing, the idea is you have to count everything the students are going to be doing, but you don't want to count it twice. So in that situation, again, just being very clear about what was accounted, what was excluded, and why. I think as long as there's a description, whoever opens it up and looks through it will understand that. So that's a really great point, Jen. So thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, basically your notes are there so that, let's say you create a course and then you end up moving to a different program and then someone revises it. You want your notes to be clear enough that someone else could pick up this document and look at it and go, oh, okay, I see what they did there. So if you can take the time to make those really clear when you're doing it, that's helpful down the road when something gets revised.
Definitely. Just real quick, I know we're a couple minutes over here. I just wanted a reminder, make sure that the final credit hour matrix and cover sheet gets sent to the credit hour at ashford.edu. That way everything gets counted. And then, I have the 132 to 138, but we want to stay at 135. So try to make sure that it's 135 before you submit it. If it's not, go back into the course guide and, make adjustments. That's the process. And then try to make it fit, for the matrix and for the course itself. And then, use your professional judgment. Definitely not cut and dry, especially like Chris said, the more creative we are in our courses, the harder it gets for credit hour. But it's not impossible. It's just, again, making sure that we are good at explaining what we're doing. And then if this is the part that often gets lost, if the course is updated, we need to make sure that we update the credit hours, and then we, go through that process again and send it back to credit hour at ashford.edu and just let them know, this course changed. There were minor revisions or whatever, but just make sure that they get the new credit hour matrix. And that is it. I will stick around if you have questions, but I also want to say if you're not sure of something, I'm glad to answer your question. I'm by no means the expert in this. I was trained many years ago and I've just done a lot of them. So, I've kind of learned a couple of tricks, and if they're really wanting us to stay to 135, it's going to take some finagling. So, don't be afraid to reach out and ask. I'm definitely willing to help in any way I possibly can. So I'll stick around if there's any questions. Thank you guys for coming.
Jesse had a question in the chat. Can you see it? You want me to read it?
I think I see
it. I can say it if you want. I was just wondering, sorry. I was just wondering, so you're saying to resubmit the credit hour form if there are changes. So what if just those minor changes, say there's a broken link in a course and you replace it for another resource that's the same, do you still submit a new one, or is that equivalency so we're good?
Yes, if it's equivalent, it's fine. The only thing that might be a little off are, your notes that you've taken on it. So if you want those to be accurate, it's really good to resend it. But those broken links, they can get tricky because sometimes the resource that's replaced it, and I think this is a great example, the resource that's replaced it could be less or more. So now it's throwing off the credit hours again. So we do have to revisit it. That's why those notes are so important, because if you don't have them and there's a broken link, you're like, where did I count it? How did I count it? Where did I, and so if it's noted in the document, you know exactly where to go to fix it. So that's a good question. You're welcome.
I always think it's good to do a quick credit hour as you're creating the course, so that if you don't get to the end and you're like, okay, now let me do the credit hours, and then you're way off. It's okay if you're close, like what KB was showing with the resources or the page numbers, you can kind of alter that. But if you keep a check as you're going through, that'll kind of keep you on track. Like if you're already, you're in week 3 and you're like, I'm already almost at my full amount of hours, you're not going to add in 2 more papers or anything. So you want to kind of keep track as you go along, and then go back and kind of redo it once you're done, just to make sure you have everything correctly. But I used to just keep one as I was building a course.
Yeah, and I know in Eddie we did like a preliminary credit check, and it was really just preliminary before we sent it off to QA, because a lot of times those QA changes, they affect everything depending on what they are. And then went and did the official one before the course was submitted, to Lauren and team, so that way we could make adjustments if our credit hours were off. So
Allie, you just reminded me of something that came up when Lori and I were developing courses, and I'd love some clarification on it. When you're doing instructor guidance, where you're recommending things that aren't necessarily required resources, will those count against you on your credit hour calculations, or are those just an instructor guidance has a specific assigned number, so I can put as many recommended resources as I want in there?
Yeah, you can put as many resources in there, because those are not required.
Perfect.
They're often saving students time when they need a resource if they take the time to read your guidance.
Right.
So that's good for them, but it's not required. So add as much as you would like.
That's great to know. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Okay, well, I will send out the recording and all of the materials. I'll get some clarification on some of the questions that came up, and thank you, Allie, for your willingness to help with that. And I just thank you, everybody. I'm here if you have any questions or if you need anything.
That was awesome, Katie. Thank you so much.